Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jim D'Antona, and I am the President, CEO of the San Luis Obispo Chamber. We are so glad all of you are back today. The theory was today's webinar would be a brief update on any new info coming out of the SBA, and then a lot of time for your questions. It looks like there were some big changes overnight into today, and so we are so glad to have Judy Mahan, Director of the Small Business Development Center, with us to talk about those changes. And thank you for being here, Judy. Additionally, we have Kathy Eppright, lawyer with Andre Morris and Buttery, with us to talk about employment issues and how they may be affecting your business decision. As a bit of housekeeping, we will be taking those questions that were submitted earlier this week first and tackling those. Then, time permitting, we will dive into questions that you can post in the Q&A button at the bottom. Please don't post them in the chat or else we probably won't see them. One other note I want to let you know about is we have Kristen from the SBDC behind the scenes providing written answers to some of the questions posed. So please watch the answered section in case your question gets answered in writing. Hopefully we'll be able to get through more questions that way and really appreciate the SBDC's work to help our community out. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Judy, thank you for being here and being so generous with your time. Can you bring us up to speed on what the latest news is and what our business folks should know?
Thank you, Jim. Thank you for inviting us. It's always a great opportunity for us to share the information with a large audience. So we found out very late last night. I think a lot of people maybe followed on the news this morning. Unfortunately, under the CARES Act, $349 billion had been allocated to the PPP Loan Program, which is the Paycheck Protection Program. Businesses have been applying to access this loan over the last 2 weeks. The $349 billion that had been set aside to fund those loans has been entirely expended as of today. So we're recommending to our clients that this is just a program that has been put on pause. It is not the end of the program. We're fairly certain there will be additional funding allocated to this program. It will need to be approved by Congress. So there is going to be a delay, but it's just a pause in the access to resources and funding for our local businesses. So that's the number one point I wanted to make. I just want to reassure business owners that it's not the end of the program. There will be more funding. We've been really pleased to see some local businesses successfully access funding over the last couple of weeks. So we have seen money come in, and it's going to continue to happen over the next coming weeks. Just to give you some idea of how quickly we accessed funding, the EIDL program kicked in, and within 10 days, PPP became available. So we feel that now that the process is in place, we should get access again fairly swiftly. Number two, we're recommending that companies continue to prepare for these loans. For the EIDL loan, they will be asked for documentation. We checked again with a company that obtained, a local company here on the Central Coast, obtained approval for a $500,000 loan under EIDL. They did submit their 2018 tax returns, their profit and loss statement for 2019, and some personal information to check on credit scores. Again, credit scores have to be 660 or above. So what we're encouraging clients to do and business owners to do is, if you still don't have those documents ready and handy, prepare your documentation, be ready. Continue to prepare to access these loans. Get your financials in order so that you can submit what you need to submit when the portals reopen. And the same is true for PPP. It's a very simple borrower form to fill out. It's a 2-page form. If you haven't filled it out yet, get ready, complete the form, stay in communication with your local bank, and be ready to prepare your proof of payroll. Have you talked to your payroll processing agent? Have you looked at your bank statements? Have you looked at your Schedule C on your IRS tax return? Gather your data, gather your information, be ready. The portals are going to open up again It's just a question of time. So don't waste any time fumbling to gather your documents. And, another program that is going to become available, and maybe we can share some slides on those. I think I'll be doing the share screen. And this is for the, let's see, I'm pulling it up right now. It's for the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program. So this is a new program. And I'm sharing the screen right now so you can see my latest slides, or the latest slides from the SBDC. This program will become available on April 28th. So the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, that extends unemployment benefits for sole proprietors, self-employed, independent contractors, maybe individuals who qualified for unemployment benefits, but those have expired. And maybe Kathy will be able to shed a bit more light on some of these resources when she comes on board. Basically, you must meet one of 12 criteria. And for the most part, as long as there's been some kind of impact due to COVID, you will likely be able to apply, whether or not you've been, I can go through them real briefly, diagnosed with symptoms, unable to work because you had to self-quarantine. There's a member of your household who's been diagnosed. You're providing care for a family member that has been diagnosed. You have children or people in your household for whom you are a primary caregiver, and schools are closed, facilities are closed, that forces you to have to take care at the home of these people. You were the main breadwinner, and because there's been a death in your family, in your household because of COVID, you had to quit your job as a direct result of COVID. Your place of employment has closed due to COVID. You were scheduled to start a job that has now become unavailable because of COVID. You were unable to reach the place of employment due to COVID. And you work as an independent contractor with reportable income. You might be able to qualify. So the benefits are the same as the ones under unemployment, regular unemployment benefits. It's a 39-week period, as long as, again, you have to meet one of the 12 criteria that we just discussed. There is an additional $600 available per week for a certain limited amount of time, in addition to the regular unemployment benefits. And we encourage you to check out the California EDD page, as well as the Investopedia page that lays out some detailed information about this new program. I'll stop share my screen. So yeah, we'll take questions. For business owners that are sole proprietors, independent contractors, self-employed, if it is getting too dire for you to wait to get access to these loans, sit tight. Hopefully you can make it until April 28th. Apply for PUA, try to get the benefits in place while the whole loan processing pathway is being explored. So I think those are the best tips that we have for you today. Back to you, Jim.
Thanks, Judy. And so just a quick question off of that, though, is so when you're recommending to folks who maybe on Tuesday or Wednesday had just started the application process, what was the general kind of recommendation to them on potentially looking at how should they plan forward, even if, like, again, when they were still accepting applications, that time lag, was there anything that you were giving them a heads up on or to be, prepared for?
In connection with the demands for the loan, or in connection for business?
For the demands on the loan.
Yeah, so what we've seen happen is on the EIDL loan, so that's the first loan that was available. So that's the one that most people applied for first, and that's the one that they're going to receive a response on first. So what's happened is the loan advances have come in for a number of people and over this past week. people are receiving approximately $1,000 per employee. If you're a sole proprietor or if you're sole member LLC with no employees, you would receive $1,000 based on the loan advance program. That amount will be forgiven. And then you receive an email asking you to actually set up a login account, to create an account on the EIDL SBA portal. So you can finally actually open up an account. And then that's through that portal, through that account, that they will ask you to submit that additional documentation. So if you did submit all the original documentation that was requested prior to March 30th, you'll be good to go. The only thing they're going to verify is your identity, your bank information, and they're going to ask you to sign loan documents. And that is what happened to our one client who obtained their $500K EIDL loan. They had already submitted all the prior documents prior to March 30th. So it was a very simple 5-minute setup and a sign off on the documents, on the loan documents. So that's for EIDL. For PPP, again, prepare your proof of payroll, make sure you have the backup documentation, and be ready to communicate with your bank. So we do have some updates on banks. We know that SLO, our local credit union, has qualified for SBA lending. So they have been approved. I talked to a few people from SLO yesterday. So they will be ready to process PPP loans as soon as the portals open back up. So anyone who is currently with a bank that is not processing PPP loans, think about having a conversation with SLO. They're very willing, very open to work with you. Online, there's some new players that are now available to process PPP loans. There's QuickBooks. If you have an account with QuickBooks, you will likely qualify through QuickBooks for a PPP, and also PayPal. We've seen some companies have success through PayPal. Lendio, I believe, is currently no longer accepting new applications. And so I would put that on pause for now.
So in general, on those pieces, the pause, all of them were still on pause now until there's a new round of funding proposed or approved. But when that does come open, those new banks could be options.
Absolutely. And something else, just to clarify, this is a question that has come up quite a bit today. Anyone that has submitted as of yesterday, you are still in line for the loan. You don't lose your queue in line. You're in line. You will get processed when it picks back up. There's no need to reapply once the portals open back up. So if you have applied, sit tight, you're in line. There's not much more you can do. Just keep very close, be in close communication with your banker, and just make sure you're communicating as much as possible.
And then just from a business perspective, I'm sure you are not a congressperson, nor the president, nor any that would have authority to make those things, probably, thankfully, at this point. But in terms of making business decisions now, even if, from my experience in government, to spin up this and get it going, if they started today, you'd still be probably a week before something was finished, concluded, right? I mean, so you should make business decisions that this won't necessarily be refunded as of tomorrow.
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement, Jim. I think, it took them, well, here's the thing. It took them about 10 days from EIDL, the CARES Act, to come into effect. It was just about 10 days. But they were putting in place a brand new process, right? Now the process is in place. We have a good handle on it. It's just a question of doing a plug and play. So will that help accelerate? Can we assume that based on that, it'll go a little faster? I'm hopeful. I'm really hopeful. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that makes two of us for sure, or probably thousands of us. But yeah, hopefully it's they can move and pull those triggers a little faster. So thank you for that update. And what I'd like to do is see with these decisions coming up and with folks making choices on their loans or getting feedback on that. Obviously, they're going to have to make decisions about their employees, their employment, how things are working. And so I'd like to kind of bring in Kathy Eppright here and have her talk maybe a little bit about maybe what she's advising her clients to do, during this time. Kathy, from Andre Morrison Buttery, the lawyer, and has been super helpful with us. We really appreciate you taking the time to be here today, and maybe you can give us a little update on what, how you're seeing this go.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me. I would say that the advice I'm giving to my clients really is dependent on their particular situation. So it's hard to give a one-size-fits-all kind of direction to people. But I would say that a common thing that I'm seeing that probably a lot of people are dealing with right now is this kind of what to do while we're waiting for this loan money to come in. And as Judy was saying, she was suggesting that people continue to prepare to be able to take advantage of whatever new funding comes along. My advice is people should continue to prepare for the delay. So my feeling is that at this point, because we know there is going to be a delay, that what people should do at this point is take stock of where they are right now. Can they afford to continue whatever limited operations they're doing? And what are they doing with this population of employees they hoped to keep on payroll? So the thing that I'm seeing a lot of businesses do that I think is a mistake is not define to their employees what their status is. So one thing that I think people need to do is really define to each person, have they been laid off? Are they furloughed? If they've been furloughed, has that furlough been extended beyond what they originally told their employees? Or are they just maintaining them on payroll? And if they originally had hoped to just keep people on payroll because they were expecting this PPP money to come in, and now that's been delayed, then they've got to go back and evaluate whether they can continue to keep people on payroll. Because if they can't, then they need to furlough them or lay them off, and they can always bring them back once the money comes in. So one of the questions that I get a lot is, well, what's the difference between furlough and a layoff? A layoff is a termination, so it's the ending of that person's employment with you. And a furlough is not a termination, so the person remains your employee, which means you continue to have duties to that person, potentially. And also they're just not being paid, but they're your hope is that they're going to be reinstated as soon as they or as soon as you have the business to support it. Under California law, an extended furlough is treated as in the same way in terms of pay as a termination. So even though you're not terminating, you furlough the person, you're expected to give them a final paycheck, which would include all of their accrued vacation. And that's something that a lot of businesses were not expecting. And some of that can be an expensive one-time hit if you're furloughing everybody off at the same time. One question that came through on the advanced questions was whether or not you could, as an employer, not pay out the vacation because an employee has asked you to keep their bank intact and not pay it out. I would tell you to be very, very careful about doing that because yes, I guess you can do it if the employee says, I don't want the money, it's their income, it's deferred compensation. But the problem you might run into is 2-3 weeks down the road, an employee, or maybe a month down the road, or even 4 years down the road, someone could say, you withheld that money and you should have paid me out that vacation. So they could change their mind. So at the very least, get it in writing. If someone says, I really don't want you to write me a check and pay out on my vacation, I'd rather have it sit in my accrual bank, have them write you a letter or an email that says that. It's still not immunity because someone could say you pressured them to do that. So I would be careful. It's cleaner just to pay it out. So if you have to make decisions on who to keep and who to let go or who to furlough, the other thing you need to keep in mind is the potential that someone could say you made these choices in a discriminatory way. So my advice to people is to look at what you need right now. Do you need 5 people and you have 25 employees? If that's the case, then you look at what tasks, duties do you need performed? Who is best suited to fulfill those duties? Can they do more than one thing, which makes them more valuable to you to keep them on because they can cover payroll and they can do AR and something else for you. So you look at cross-training talents and skills, and seniority is frequently a category that's used to try to figure out how do you pick the 5 out of the 25. But then once you define whatever the criteria is and you apply it, then you look at how did it turn out? When you look at the 5 out of the 25, did you select all the men and not a single woman when you have a high population of women? Could you potentially be accused of inadvertently even having a discriminatory impact on a particular group? So you want to be sensitive to how your choice is going to ultimately impact certain groups, and are you targeting or inadvertently targeting a particular protected category like gender or disability or race, something along those lines. Then the last thing I would say that I think people are really struggling with is how to deal with the new paid sick leave and the new paid family FMLA leave. 2 things I want to make sure everyone here knows is, 1, it doesn't apply automatically. So if you have employees who have not been furloughed or not been laid off, you need to have them request it in writing to you and provide some documentation so that you can demonstrate that when you paid the 2 weeks paid sick leave to someone, they qualified. And that's important because you're going to want to try to obtain a credit against your payroll taxes, and the IRS is going to be looking for that documentation. So don't tell all your employees, hey, all of you get 2 paid weeks of sick leave. Tell your employees it's an available benefit, but I need documentation. You need to submit a request and provide me with the documentation, and then carefully figure out what category they fall under, classify that, clearly mark what you're paying as, is it emergency paid sick leave? Is it emergency paid family medical leave? And then keep those records segregated so you can easily support your request for a credit later down the road. The confusion that people are having is stemming from whether or not someone has been furloughed or not. So if you have not clearly classified employees that you consider to be furloughed, you need to do that, because once they're furloughed, then their benefits come under the unemployment EDD bucket, and they're not eligible for the paid sick leave and paid FMLA. If they have not been furloughed, then they would be potentially entitled to these new benefits. So classification of the employee is critical as it relates to whether to apply those benefits or not.
Kathy, there are a couple of things in there, so much that's interesting, but I would say that some of the key pieces, having spent some time in HR, in a public sector and in a private sector job, the idea of unintentionally discriminating, I think is a key piece that our business owners, that you don't want to make that mistake. Like, you chose people based on certain criteria, but in the end, you did choose all men, all women, or a protected class, or you didn't protect a certain class. And so even though private sector is at will, you still have to be cognizant of those, correct?
Yes, that is correct. It's, I wish I had a dime for every time I had somebody say, but they're at will. They're at will, and that does mean that you can terminate them without having to have a reason or give advance notice. But it's limited by restrictions on terminations that are a violation of public policy. So terminating somebody because of their gender, because of their race, a disability, the factors that are protected under law, those are considered to be bad reasons for terminating somebody. So it's an exception to the at-will doctrine. So definitely, anytime you're doing a termination, in particular a layoff, you want to step back and you want to see, okay, now that I've decided who I'm keeping and who I'm letting go, what does that picture look like? Have I selected everyone in a particular category, and does it appear that I have unwittingly discriminated against a particular category? The smaller you are, the more leeway you have. But the other thing I would say is, and I say the more leeway because you do have fewer choices. You know, when you only have 25 people, it's hard not to inadvertently impact a particular group. So you do get a little bit of leeway, but I would say that you still need to be sensitive to it. And smaller businesses run into the situation where they don't lay off 15 people, they lay off 3 or 2, or God forbid 1. If you're laying somebody off and you're picking one person out of a group, then it's probably more of a performance termination and not really a layoff. But you know, that's something that someone should talk to a lawyer about before they make the final decision.
Yeah, and that's, again, like I said, I was so glad you said it, because again, coming out of HR, being in the chamber world, well, we're at will. Yeah, I know, but still. Got to consider those pieces, because there are pitfalls within that. I think one other key piece I'd like to jump in before we hit the other questions is you made a comment between furloughed, extended furloughed, layoff. Are those 3 different kind of lanes of time?
Oh, I'm glad you, yeah, I'm glad you asked. So the reason I said a furlough versus an extended furlough is because when all this was starting to unfold, none of us really knew what to expect. And so some employers told their employees, go home, I don't have work for you, I'm gonna have to figure out what we're gonna do. And the hope was that it was only gonna be for a couple of days or maybe a week or 2. But obviously it got extended. And it's actually that category that seems to be the most problematic, because it has kind of been forgotten. Some of those employees went ahead and applied for unemployment because they didn't get called back. But some of those employees are sitting at home, not sure, do they apply for unemployment? Have they been furloughed? So that's why I'm recommending to my clients that they regroup, figure out, do they have a place for any of these people? Now that there are some businesses that have been able to continue to operate, there might be a way to bring some of those employees back. But if you know right now that you're not an essential business, or you're an essential business and don't have enough work to support half of those people, then reach out to them and tell them, unfortunately, we're going to have to furlough you and extend it beyond what we had hoped. And so here's a letter, take it to the EDD, and they can apply for unemployment. And then at least their status is clarified, so that you and they both know which bucket they fall into, what benefits are they entitled to.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, that's, I think, was such a, again, with so many unknowns, we understand our business leaders, we're just trying to figure out how to make that work. But as this has grown, we obviously need to be very clear about where our employees' status on for their benefits, but also so that you don't run into any legal entanglements. So Kathy, thank you for that. We're going to jump in now to some of the questions. And the first one I think I have, it goes to Judy. So we'll bring Judy back up here. And I know in the Q&A, I think it's come up already, but I think we can talk about this one. I have a family childcare home business, childcare provider without any employees. Do they still qualify for the PPP loan to pay themselves business insurance, utility, and mortgage interest? But I also think it would also probably potentially be available through PUA if this PPP wasn't immediately available.
Yeah, so maybe what I can do is we have another set of slides here that I'm going to pull up real quick and share my screen. So this was, you know, until we found out this morning that EIDL and PPP had been put on hold, these were the slides we were going to share. So the EIDL and the PPP options were available. They're now on pause. Under EIDL, EIDL is available for sole proprietors, independent contractors. The eligibility criteria is up here on this slide. What we have recommended, by the way, a couple of new pieces of information which we had not shared last week is that new business owners, we had a couple of situations of people who were starting a brand new business come January, had absolutely no history of any payroll, any draws or anything as far as proof of payroll was concerned. They would not qualify for PPP, but they certainly should focus on EIDL. So for this person, I would recommend, while these are on pause, while EIDL is on pause and PPP on pause, yes, PUA is a great option. Again, it won't be available until April 28th, but as soon as these portals open back up, then EIDL is a great way to get a loan to cover expenses that are non-payroll related, and PPP will allow to cover a draw for that sole proprietor and to cover payroll for that sole proprietor for a period of 8 weeks. I'll pull up the slides on the updates on PPP, which we were going to share and decided not to because of the update this morning. Again, PPP is available for sole proprietors, self-employed, independent contractors, absolutely. Proof of payroll, if you're a sole proprietor or self-employed, you can use your Schedule C on your tax return. Confirming that you should only make one PPP application per business entity or per self-employed person. And those were all the updates we had on PPP.
Hey, Jim, if I could mention too that the emergency paid sick leave and the emergency FMLA, there is a provision in, I haven't studied it, so I can't go into all the details, but I know that there's a provision in that new law that allows for self-employed to take a credit for them to take paid sick time or paid family leave if they have a child enclosed. So that's another thing that someone should look into if they're self-employed as a way of trying to minimize the financial hit that they're taking.
So the strategy here, and Kathy, correct me if I'm wrong, but what we are recommending is access the resources that are available. For example, this paid sick leave or paid family leave for self-employeds. You know, maybe you can tap into that, then evolve into PUA, and then evolve into EIDL and PPP. So it's all about being, you know, very strategic and what's available now, tap into it. It expires after a couple of weeks, great. By then PUA will have kicked in. That's available for another 39 weeks. That gives you plenty of time to figure out EIDL and PPP. EIDL it's intended to be available all the way through December 31st. So we have plenty of time. EIDL is a long-term loan. It's a 30-year term. At an interesting interest rate. It is a loan, but it's worth, you know, if you can get that 30-year term, it's worth tapping into. PPP, the legislation states it will be available as long as the funding gets, you know, made available by Congress, will be available through June 30th. So again, look at that timeline, look at those dates, and figure out what's the best strategy into tapping into all of the resources. They're not exclusive of each other. You can tap into all of them.
Yeah, that's extremely helpful, is understanding, and that's what's great about having you folks here, is just having that conversation and knowing all of those different streams, because one of the things we're hearing from all of our members is you know, there's a lot of talk, but people aren't hearing. And so putting all these pieces together to string us, to get you through this crisis is really the key, and making all of that available and knowing what's available. So we're really appreciative of everything you're sharing. I think the biggest thing we're hearing from folks is really that it's really the self-employed individual, right? Some of the S Corps and the bigger ones have folks to help them understand it, but a couple questions that came up from the self-employed individuals who've had a big drop in their income due to COVID, and now they're eligible for unemployment, but do we know if their unemployment benefits will be reduced if their income is still higher than what the weekly benefit would have been? So let's say you're self-employed and you're still making money, not even close to where you were at, but still that maximum weekly benefit is, you're still making more than the maximum weekly benefit. Do you know if they reduce based on that from either of your experience?
I don't have any knowledge on that. Kathy, do you?
No, I don't know if they, you know, they generally have not extended unemployment benefits to self-employed people. So it's kind of a new product, I guess. And I don't know what they'll do in that circumstance, because generally unemployment is premised on either a reduction in hours or a reduction or a loss of income. So I don't know how they'll treat the unemployment when somebody is still making more than the weekly benefit.
Yeah, I think that's one of those kind of key pieces where you're looking at, you know, these new programs that are coming online for this specific emergency, but we're not getting full clarity yet because we're not sure how it's going to apply. So,
but I would say this: they should apply.
Correct.
So no matter what, you submit your application and see if you're eligible, and then, you know, but you, like we've been saying, you prepare and try to utilize other strategies in the meantime. So, but I would definitely apply and let them tell you that you're not eligible.
Yeah, it's a great point on all of these, to be honest. It's, you know, again, as your livelihood is attached to it, you know, spending the time to do it can certainly be helpful. Going over the sources of money available, you know, obviously a lot of folks to open their businesses who are, you know, sole proprietors, no employees. From the grant side, really the only, the options coming in are the PPP loans. Is that correct, Judy?
That's correct for now. I mean, so there are some federal loans, federal grants available through different federal agencies, but truly that's to support more research and innovation driven type efforts. So there are companies that are trying to work on a COVID vaccine, or to work on any type of relief that is connected to COVID. There's a number of grants that have been made available. If you need more information, if you're in the med tech industry, do reach out to us. We're at slosbdc@gmail.com, slosbdc@gmail.com. We do have a list of current available grants to support the med tech community. We haven't posted it online because it's such a niche, resource, but we do have that resource. We have information about the resource available if people want to get in touch with us.
Yeah, excellent. Kathy?
I was just going to say, I was looking at some of the questions that have come in, and I just want to touch, there are a couple that are asking the same thing, if you don't mind me making sure we get to it. So some of the questions have been, what do I do about employees that I furloughed, but they, for some reason, aren't applying for the unemployment? We've encouraged them to apply for it. We've given them the information, but they're not applying for it. Does that impact the employer? And my answer is no, it doesn't. If the only thing I would say is make sure you've documented that they have been furloughed, that that's their status. So if you have not already done so, make sure you send some kind of letter or email that clarifies that their employment they've been placed on a furlough as of such and such a date, and therefore they need to be contacting the EDD about wage replacement benefits. The other question that keeps coming up is, well, a lot of these people are making more money through unemployment than they were working for me, and now they don't want to come back. What do I do? Because I want to bring them all back so that I get the loan forgiveness benefit. And Judy, you tell me if I'm wrong, but I think that their solution is to advertise and hire somebody else if the person doesn't want the job. And then they will, as long as they have the same census numbers in that period of time that matters for the loan forgiveness, that's all that matters. It doesn't matter that they didn't bring back the very people that they may have previously employed. Is that your understanding too, Judy?
That's my understanding. It's head count. It's pure numbers. So yes, that's my understanding as well. Yes.
That is one of those funny questions, Kathy, that you brought up that we've been hearing. And certainly it is a part that fits for some folks, though if you're hiring folks back, I mean, some folks probably want to take the job, you know, the one in the hand that you can get now because you don't know what's going to be there afterwards. But it's certainly a question that's come up, and I've heard it more than on one occasion.
Yeah, and it's a unique circumstance because normally you just get replacement wages of what you lost. But in this case, because the federal government has infused the unemployment benefit with additional monies, that does result, especially in lower wage employees, to end up receiving more in benefits than they do if they were to continue to go back to work. So it is a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. An interesting one that, and Judy, maybe you can opine on this. If you put money into your business from your personal savings to pay bills such as rent, utilities, would the PPP and EIDL loans be able to reimburse yourself if you could still, as long as you can document where you received the money from and how it was, what it was paying for?
Yeah, I mean, if you follow the corporate rules around that, you have to have some kind of maybe a promissory note in place or something that documents that this is a loan from you personally to the business that needs to be reimbursed. It's been approved by, if you have a board in place, it's been approved by your board. If you have something in a partnership agreement or your operating agreement for your LLC, the other members have approved the transaction if necessary. Yes, it has to be documented, but I don't see any issues with that.
Great.
And then the reimbursement would more likely be under, so again, you have to track your payments separately. EIDL would cover that type of cost versus PPP, which is just for payroll, or 75% for payroll.
Yeah, exactly. So here's interesting. I mean, again, this is kind of crystal balling, so I know this is not something you'll probably be able to answer directly. But if someone has applied for EIDL and PPP programs before Wednesday, but have not been approved or funded as of Wednesday, what's the likelihood they're going to be funded, or the funds are still available?
So the funds are no longer available. They have been expended. But what we've been told is that they're going to maintain, again, just I think I mentioned at the start, they're going to maintain the order in line as to when they applied. So they don't need to reapply once the portals reopen. When there is more funding that becomes available, they will be in line for that funding. So if they applied on EIDL, you should have received, a business owner should have received an SBA loan application number. So that number will not change, and it stays their number, and that's what determines the order in line.
Great. Yeah, it's. I think that's a key point, is that yes, the funds now have been expended. Correct.
Correct.
Okay. And so, what kind of following up on the Kathy discussion and Judy that you guys were just talking about, one employee resigns yesterday, and you want to fill that with 2 part-time. will that interfere with the PPP application and possible award or loan, or is that more just like it'll impact the accounting of it, but not necessarily the loan process?
My understanding is it won't affect the loan process. That will fulfill the one full-time position. And if the payroll amount is maintained and not decreased, then it should be fine.
Right. Yeah, that's perfect. Looking at businesses that have several employees who are working part-time from home since the business is closed and is not essential, you know, can they claim the 15 hours if they're approved to work from home for a certain amount of hours, then claim the rest of those through UI? Are they allowed to then balance that out? This is a long kind of with working part-time from home, or is that let me change that out. Let me just redo that one because it got convoluted in there. But if you're working part-time from home to balance out normal hours, does that affect your part-time furlough or being considered furloughed? Kathy?
Yeah, you're being partially furloughed, I guess is the best way to put it. Your hours have been reduced is really the best way to classify it. So the person is not working their full schedule, they're working a reduced schedule. They would be eligible for unemployment insurance if the reduction in hours is because of your needs as a business. So, and I say that because I'm finding that a lot of businesses are saying that their employees are telling them, I can only work 15 hours, I can't work the rest of it. And so that tells me that that business would otherwise hire that person for 40 hours if the person was willing to work. So, and the significance of that is if you as a business say, I can only offer you 15 hours a week because of the decline in business, then they would be eligible for unemployment. I'm sorry. Yes, then they would be eligible for unemployment because they're unable to work due to a decline in your business that's causing you to offer them reduced hours. So they would go to the EDD. If on the other hand, you say, I have 40 hours worth of work, I need you to come in. And the person says, well, I can't because I have a child at home and I don't have childcare for 20 of those 40 hours. Then they would be entitled to the new emergency paid FMLA leave. And you would have to extend that benefit to them. So that's why I'm telling my clients, you know, first and foremost, decide what you need, define it. Because if you're just going along with someone telling you, I can only work 20 hours, and you haven't really even analyzed whether you would employ them for 40, then you leave yourself in this gray area and maybe potentially responsible for, let's say, emergency paid sick leave or emergency family medical leave. And you don't want to wait until the person asks for it and then tell them, oh, well, actually, we don't need you, because now it looks retaliatory. You know, that the only reason you're saying you don't need them is because they've asked for the benefit. So you need to get ahead of that by evaluating what your needs are, setting the schedule, knowing that if you say, I need you to work 40 hours and the person says they can't, then they potentially will be eligible for this benefit.
And from a furlough perspective, is a furloughed person have 0 hours or just less hours?
Well, the term furlough is really used in both. It's used by people in both settings. So there's no particular significance to calling somebody who's working fewer hours, whether they're furloughed or not. I prefer to say that if they're only working 20 hours because you have no need for them to work 40, you only need them for 20, then I would call it a partial furlough. We're going to furlough you for 20 hours a week, because we don't have a need for people to work that many hours.
Great.
Yeah.
Excellent. And so part of just another question on the furloughing, does that require you to pay the health benefits, or is that only on the fact if you had an agreement, like a contract or something that said, or your employee rules or your handbook says you are entitled at a certain point?
Well, in the old days, about a month ago, the answer would have been different. Traditionally, what you would do is you would look to see, have you reduced the person's hours to a number that is below the eligibility number. So in order to be eligible for health insurance, most carriers require that the person regularly work 30 hours or more. So in the old days, if you reduce somebody's hours to, let's say, 20 hours a week, then the carrier would say they're no longer eligible under your group health plan, and that would constitute a triggering event for COBRA, and it would require the person to elect to continue remain on your group health plan. But given the circumstances, and because the hope was that this is going to be temporary, a number of the carriers have waived that requirement. And that means that you don't COBRA the person. I would check with your insurance broker or your administrator to find out whether you have an obligation to continue to carry them or not. If the person has not been furloughed, but their hours they can't work, like the example that I gave you before, where the person says, I can only work 20 hours because I have a child that's home. And so they go on emergency paid family medical leave. Then you have an obligation to continue to provide the coverage, because that is a separate, the FMLA requires that. Same thing if somebody was on pregnancy disability leave or something like that. The ordinary laws that apply outside of the COVID environment all still apply in that regard.
If a employee is on furlough, let's say you've made the official, you're on furlough and 0 hours, and now they have a family member get sick, could they still claim now FMLA as part of from their work, or make a work comp claim because they're on even if it happens? Well, it'd be tough to make an argument on work comp, but could they say FMLA now they need to go under paid family medical leave?
No, because FMLA is not normally paid, and the only benefit that would apply would be the emergency paid family medical leave. And the Department of Labor has specifically said that it's not, that an employee who has been furloughed due to a decline in business is not eligible for that benefit.
Okay, and so if you had a partial furlough and then these things came up, then you potentially you're still going to be on the hook for work comp and FMLA and all those pieces that you normally would as any employee if it's a partial furlough.
Right. But the significance of whether it's a partial furlough or whether the person has just said, I can't come to work, is that if it's a partial furlough, if you've said, I don't have enough work for you, and so all I have is 20 hours a week, and then the person says, well, I can't work those 20 hours. I can only work 15 because I have a child home. Then that emergency paid family and medical leave would apply to those 5 hours, not the 40, because you've already said that you don't have work for them for the 20 hours a week. You're offering them 20 hours and they can only work 15. They would be able to get paid for that 5.
And so this one would probably also, this would be an employment question. So I'll make this our final one. We have employees that they're working at home for their safety and they need to use their cell phone and internet. And we're compensating for that. Is there any tax credit or write-off we can use for that? Or is that a business expense? Actually, I didn't see the last part of it. So maybe it's actually have to go get a Tim Dosa from Glenn Burdett here to answer that question. But I would think it would fall under a normal business expense.
I'm not an accountant, but I would say two things. One, you do need to reimburse and indemnify somebody who's incurred expenses because they're working for you. So figure out what's a fair allocation for their internet expense, or did they need to use their cell phone? And you figure out, try to come up with something that you think is fair to account for the expense that that person has incurred. Then second, treat that expense like you would any other expense. If you went out and bought a laptop for somebody, you bought supplies, you paid for their lunch because they had to go, work while they were having lunch. Any of those kinds of expenses, you would look at them the same way and handle them from a tax point of view the same way, I would think. But yeah, you would want to talk to an accountant about that.
Yeah, so I would recommend our friends over at Glen Burdett, Tim Dosa, who's here and we did the video with you last time, as someone who might have some ideas about that. But I think in general, that was the right idea, is that it is a business expense as you're compensating for that. Anyway, I know we're at 2:58. Look, I really appreciated, Judy and Kathy, thank you so much for taking the time to be here and answering these questions for our members and for the people around the community as we all struggle to kind of figure out how to move forward on this. I want to thank from behind the scenes who answered a ton of questions off to the side, Kristen with the SBDC. She was great. She must have been back there firing away, answering all these questions. So hopefully we got your questions answered. I see there's a couple more that we still have that we'll try to get those resolved for you. And then I'll just let folks know we're going to be here next Thursday, 2 to 3, but we'll talk about what subjects are coming up and have some more interesting content and great guests like Judy, Mahan, and Kathy Eppright. Once again, thank you so much for being here, and we appreciate all you. Stay healthy and well out there.